Good morning, people. Kind of a dreary, rainy morning down here on the river. Cool, high tide, super high tides, waiting for the eclipse tonight, actually. I hope to stay up and watch that if it clears up some. That'll be fun. It's full on springtime, um, drawing near to the equinox, all that kind of good stuff. All the little geese have their little babies in the river. All the little beavers have their babies in the river. All the eagles are trying to feed their babies up in the nests along the river on both of those. A little bit of drama about. Certainly, there's a certain amount of drama in the yacht and boat industry as well. The powerboat contingent is feeling the pressure of elevated fuel prices and the rest. You can start to see that there's a lot of projects there that were kind of on the edge that are now being abandoned. Quite a lot of boats being towed in and just given up for scrap now. Because, in fact, in the new emerging world, they are obsolete. They are forms of entertainment that are no longer viable or competitive in a world of permanently inflated fuel prices. Good riddance as far as I'm concerned. When we were out in the islands here last couple of weeks ago, I think it was rather shocking to see how little traffic there really was at the marine parks. I mean, there were some sailboats out. The powerboat posse was just absent. There was practically no one. Very quiet. Startling, actually. It reminds me of being out in the islands maybe even 30 years ago. And I got to say, personally, I found it very refreshing. Weather-wise, here this spring we have been unseasonably cold and wet, setting actually records for kind of squally storminess for the date. It's easy to complain about that, and definitely my boat's varnish looks kind of the worse the wear for it. But honestly, when you look at, for example, the drought situation across the rest of North America or many other places in the world, you've just simply got to say that we are really lucky people to have it that way. There is a concern here because the melting of the snowpack in our tiny little bubble of cold is so late now that there's a concern of a rapid shift to warmer conditions and maybe an atmospheric river sort of circumstance. We could get another kind of epic rainstorm flood out like we had last November, complete with bloated cows going down the river and the rest. I'm kind of prepped for that now. If it starts to get freaky on that score, I'm just going to blow out of the river and go fishing for a couple of weeks. So no drama there. And certainly another place I see a lot of drama are with the guys that I work with, because the guys that I work with are generally a generation ahead or a generation behind. And the guys that are generation ahead are highly invested, if they actually have any assets, in, of course, a super bloated stock market or super overpriced real estate. And the guys that are a generation behind have tried to mirror that prosperity by, in a last-ditch effort of some kind of like hope, put their money into their Bitcoin wallet or whatever. A lot of people are trying to wrap their head around the sudden discovery that assets are only worth what you sell them for. And now that people are actually starting to sell them, we're starting to discover across the board that a lot of them are worth a lot less than you might have thought. For myself, I have stepped outside of that system a while ago and have tried to move my prosperity into implied income and other ways of storing value that are less fickle, right? So like none of this is a super big surprise for me, but it is interesting to me how quickly conditions can change and how quickly people's perspectives and expectations can change. I mean, we're a long ways from resolving that whole situation. I think there's going to be a little weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth here that's going to emerge over the next few months. And some people will be spending some time in reflection about their choices because of it. And of course, on top of all this other form of drama, we have the drama of a looming and historic food shortage crisis, driven not only by environmental circumstances that are relatively unprecedented, but also certainly circumstances that are relatively engineered by powerful interests in seeking some kind of geopolitical victory here or there. It's all coming together in one big mess. The timing of this mess couldn't be more auspicious. And in fact, in various locales around the world, the food riots have already started. Who could have possibly seen that coming? I think the thing that's important to realize is that those kinds of pressures are surprisingly close to the door, even in the developed world. Even though we're coming off the period of most expansive and ostentatious prosperity ever known by humanity, a great number of individuals have been left out of that party. And the average working class, say, couple in Canada or North America is still as broke as they've ever been, right? And they're still paying prices on their real estate rentals or what have you that are as high as they've ever been. Their wages just frankly stink. There's no forward mobility or prosperity for them to see, at least any potential for that in their own future. To have a food budget double on top of having a fuel budget double, they have been living so close to the bone anyway that to absorb those costs is simply beyond their ability. And it doesn't have anything to do whether or not we can critique them for buying their Netflix or whatever. It's just simply that you've got to eat, right? And you got to somehow get to work, or the entire system comes apart for you. And we could see by the end of summer, for an awful lot of people, even here, even supposedly in the supposedly prosperous West, a significant number of individuals not able to weather those circumstances. And of course, I've often been accused of being apocalyptic, and in fact I am, as any intelligent systems thinker has to be. There's no other rational conclusion to be drawn if one has a informed and honest view about the basic challenges that face the civilizational project. That being said, generally speaking, when people label me as apocalyptic, that's done as a pejorative with the direct intent to try to discredit the view that I have by making it sound like it's unrealistically extreme. Well, let's be clear. Really what I'm envisioning in the near term is something surprisingly mundane, like double-digit unemployment with double-digit inflation. That in itself is enough to be apocalyptic for most of the people you know. And while I am fortunate enough and prosperous enough and prudent enough to insulate myself against that emerging world, it becomes apocalyptic for me because of the choices that people make when they are faced with the collapse of their own way of making their living, right? The apocalyptic scenario for me is contingent on what other people who cannot manage a world of double-digit unemployment and double-digit inflation do. But really, not to sound too glum, I mean, I'm certainly empathetic for the circumstances that many of the people I know find themselves in. Um, I mean, for anybody who's been paying any attention to anything over the last 50 years, it hasn't been particularly difficult to anticipate this emerging moment, right? It didn't take a lot. It certainly didn't take intelligence. It might have taken honesty, which is in even shorter supply than intelligence, but the basic information needed to be well prepared to face the inevitable consequences of an unsustainable civilizational project, well, like, it didn't take a lot to figure that out. So for myself, I feel actually very, very confident and, in fact, personally optimistic for my prospects of maintaining a quality of life that I enjoy and a certain kind of relevance. I am prepared to shoulder the responsibilities that may come to me from being fortunate enough to find myself in that position of privilege. I mean, there's a lot of life left to live if one is in a position to gainfully go about doing so. Well, there'll be some sadness for sure in this transition moment. Sadness is an inherent aspect of beauty, really. I don't think you can have the latter without the former. Welcome to the human condition, right? If anything, again, we need to turn ourselves outward and aggressively embrace this emerging future for the messages and the lessons it brings us, rather than to retreat into despair. Certainly that's what I intend to do. There is a quote that I remember from something I read a long time ago. Maybe one of you can inform me as to who this is, because I can't remember the source. But I believe this was from a relatively famous treatise on military history. I don't know, something I can't remember. But the quote that stood out to me was this: that the claim was made that an able-bodied individual that had a good pair of shoes and could walk 20 miles basically was autonomous enough to being able to pretty well avoid most every human catastrophe ever recorded through history. Meaning that if you were forward-thinking and able-bodied enough to just pick up your crap and walk 20 miles, most of the atrocities that occurred through human history were things that you could have basically avoided, right? And I think that's maybe an overstatement, but it's probably true. If you take that attitude and you expand the idea of being able to walk 20 miles into, like, hoist sails and sail a couple of thousand, which I could basically do and get underway and probably inside of 15 minutes and hardly put on my shoes faster. Well, that piratey kind of legitimate, authentic, autonomous living, man, having the ability to do that for real in spades at any point in time, being able to be confident in the knowledge that you have options regardless of what the future looks like, that's really precious. But one has to engineer a life around that value. That is not something that a lot of people have done. They've done the opposite. They've married themselves to the system that is now about to, in the most dramatic of manner, really leave them high and dry. I didn't really trust that system, so I've been removing myself from it while enjoying it for a long time. If you haven't gotten started on that project, I would recommend you get on it in short order. Cheers.